Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, March 29th, and here is today's Monday Morning Minute. For today, I want to briefly recap last week's readings, then we'll talk about this week's reading, which is Spires chapter 4, then a couple of course notes and reminders for you. So last week, if you recall, it was a bit of a choose your own adventure in terms of selecting which reading you most wanted to dive into. And just by way of letting you know what was going on in all of the readings, some sort of big ideas, in case you want to check out any of these for your further edification. I just wanted to give a brief overview. So the Winchell piece from 2019 that was about discourse, so specifically academic language, academic discourse in the context of disciplinary literacy. And he makes a pretty compelling point there. He says, we have decades of accumulated evidence that academically productive talk, meaning talk that is cognitively demanding, deliberative, reciprocal, and accountable to the discipline, has a direct and positive influence on students across a wide range of subject matters. So something to kind of consider when you're observing classrooms and as you start to teach classrooms is try to figure out the percentage of academically productive talk that students are doing versus the teacher. Obviously, we want students to be doing much more of this academically productive talk than teachers, but often that's not the case. So Winchell lays out 3 separate routines that kind of work together to help students grasp this academically productive talk. So he talks about just setting the norm of intellectual risk taking within the classroom. He talks about some linguistic scaffolds you can use, as well as some discursive talk moves, including some like sentence frames that will help students frame their opinions. And so anyway, excellent article, would highly recommend. And then I had 2 chapters from Lent. First was focused on reading within the disciplines. And here I hope that anything that was sort of missing from our Spires text in terms of what does disciplinary literacy or disciplinary reading specifically look like in my content area, I hope that answer was found more specifically within this chapter. Lent gives great suggestions for incorporating reading, and she talks about reading as, of course, something that looks different in every discipline. So this doesn't necessarily mean that math teachers have to bring in, articles, although you certainly could, but thinking about what reading takes place in math already, right? Reading data, reading charts, interpreting them, that's part of literacy. So, all in all, she does say there is simply no downside to reading frequently, widely, and voraciously, whatever that looks like in your discipline. And then finally, the Lent chapter, Writing Within the Disciplines, was illuminating, and I hope many of you checked that out as well. She talks about writing as the neglected R in terms of the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. Reading and arithmetic get a lot of attention, writing does not. However, we do know that across content areas, and even in math and science, as the article quotes, writing brings more than literacy and communication advantages. The practice of writing can enhance the brain's intake, processing, retaining, and retrieving of information. And therefore, that should be something that we're doing across our content areas. And again, in that chapter, Lent gives many examples of what this could look like. So again, that's just a brief overview. Those links will be good forever. So you are welcome to download all of these articles right now and save them for later if you don't have time, but they're there for you. So this week we are returning to our Spires text and we're looking at chapter 4, Creatively Synthesizing Information. Okay, so a huge takeaway here is that synthesizing is hard. It is high level work. If you've ever had to write a literature review where you're taking lots of ideas and looking at ways in which you can connect them and boil them down, you know that it's taxing. And this is something that students struggle with, and it's something that we don't often teach them how to do successfully. So there are a couple ideas contained in this chapter that show you how to help your students synthesize information, right? And this is building on chapter 3, thinking about close reading or finding sources. So now that we have those sources, how can we take the good stuff, the meat and potatoes from each of them, and synthesize them together, boil them down, come up with some big ideas based on our research? So they talk a lot here. So that synthesis piece is kind of at the start of the chapter, and then the rest of the chapter is how to creatively showcase the information that you have synthesized. So they talk a lot about using digital tools to support multiliteracies, multimodal literacy, critical literacy. These three concepts are where I live in terms of my research, thinking about literacy very, very broadly. With critical literacy specifically, they draw on Paulo Freire, and maybe some of you know his name. He was a famous, and still, I guess, his fame has outlived his life. Sadly, that was a weird tangent, but anyway, he's fabulous Brazilian educator who's credited with founding a field of studies called critical pedagogy, and his famous line is, through critical literacy, through this critical pedagogy, this lens, we're helping students read the word and the world, right? Reading the world itself as a text. And also in this chapter, I wanted to highlight this notion of educational cosmopolitanism, which I think is a really empowering stance to position our students within. So instead of just kind of positioning students as passive spectators of the world, we're positioning them as active agents of change. And so they link to the priorities of the United Nations in terms of stemming world hunger, eradicating diseases, and they're asking us to take our students, to invite our students into these conversations, into this discourse, and to design solutions through the PBI projects that we do with them. And then the last piece, I threw this image up here. You'll find this in the text as well. This builds on, perhaps you've heard of pedagogical content knowledge, but if you haven't, it's typically credited to this guy Schulman, who's at Stanford. And the idea here is that teaching means that you need to have content knowledge, right? You got to know your content super well. You also have to have pedagogical content knowledge. In other words, you have to know how to teach the content. It's not enough just to have the content knowledge. You have to know how to teach the content effectively. And sort of a 21st century spin, there's the idea of technological pedagogical content knowledge. So you have to know how to use technology to teach your content knowledge effectively. It's a lot of layers there, and it's complex. And honestly, teaching is complex work, and we know this. And I know you all knew this even coming into this program, right? So just something, I guess, to think about, to ponder on, that we're asking you to not only be experts at pedagogical content knowledge, but adding that technology component in as well. So I'm super interested to hear what you all have to say about this. Okay, just a couple of course notes. Remember that our literacy artifact analysis is due on Sunday, April 4th, coming up this week. There is an asterisk there because, as you all know, this is not a hard and fast deadline. If it doesn't come in on Sunday, April 4th, that is A-okay. Remember that the end-all be-all deadline is May 5th, so still over a month away. And then finally, we do have a drop-in hour this week, Tuesday, the 30th of March at 5:45 p.m. So please feel free to come by if you'd like, and we can chat about the artifact analysis. We can chat about, of course, anything related to disciplinary literacy, anything you'd like. So take care this week, everyone. Stay safe. Do something that is rejuvenating for you. That's perhaps your only real assignment this week. Take care of yourself. And I will see you next week for our last all-class synchronous session. All right, cheers.